Hello everyone. So this is our first cyber attacks and data breaches for 2023. So welcome to our first Launch and Learn webinar. So basically, one of the things that you may have noticed, human error is how most organizations get compromised. So that's why we are running these Launch and Learn webinars. So during this critical phase, people can be either the first line of defense or the weakest link in the chain. So what you need to understand is your security posture is as strong as your weakest link in the chain. Ideally, we want to learn from other people's mistakes. We need to understand how other organizations got compromised, whether it's because of human error or technology. More than 85% is because of human error. But long story short, with bad actors becoming smarter in their attacks, we really need to be aware of what's going on within cyberspace, and we need to always stay ahead of them. So it's quite important to learn from other people's mistakes. That's why we are running this webinar. So today, we're going to do a very good case study around 4 recent cyber attacks in Australia and 1 cyber attack globally. So we did a bit of a case study about Optus and Medibank in last webinar, but today we're going to go a little bit deep dive about the consequences around Optus and Medibank cyber attacks, and also we're going to do a case study around AGL and TPG. So we usually cover 4 Australian cyber attack and data breaches and 1 overseas. This webinar, we are covering Capital One Bank, which is in US and Canada. All right, just a brief of what has happened. Optus, the type of attack was PII data breach. Personal identifier information got compromised. The cause of the attack was misconfigured API, and the impact was for 10 million Australian people. Personal identifier information got compromised. Medibank, the type of attack was ransomware plus PII and PHI, which is the personal health information data breach. So the cause of the attack was the compromised login credential, and the impact was 9.8 million PII and PHI reports compromised. For AGL, the type of attack was personal identifier information data breach. The cause was stolen credential, and the impact for more than 6,000 customers of AGL. TPG, the type of attack data breach. The cause was unauthorized access to the hosted exchange email platform, and the impact on 15,000 customers' email addresses. So Capital Bank, personal identifier information and bank account. So the cause was unauthorized access to their cloud environment, which has impacted 100 million individuals in the United States and 6 million in Canada. All right, so that's what we're going to discuss today. Let's start with the first one, which is Optus, the PII data breach. So basically PII is personal identifier information. Any kind of information get identified you as a person, such as name, surname, email address, phone number, driver license number, and all that sort of thing. So the Optus data breach is mainly because of a misconfigured API, which is the application programming interface. So Optus customer data was accessed via an API that allowed anyone who knew about that API to get all those information from Optus environment. So it was an vulnerability which was not known by Optus. The hackers, they got to identify the vulnerability before Optus identified that. They could manage to get the personal details of Optus customers. So the impact was quite significant. 9.8 million Optus customers' personal identifying information was stolen, such as the names, date of birth, phone number, email address, and driver license number. Fortunately, the hard number was not part of that breach. So a lot of people ask me that question, all right, do we need to change our driver license? Yes, it is recommended you guys change your driver license, but those informations are not good enough to kind of impersonation or identity theft, because in Australia we need both driver license number and the card number. So luckily the card number was not part of the breach. What was part of the breach was the name, surname, date of birth, phone number, email, address, and driver license number. Quite unfortunate, but the card number was not part of the breach, which is a good thing. So because of that, it is highly recommended to change your driver license number, but you don't really have to. So basically, both financial damage and reputation damage was quite high for Optus. So basically, they have allocated 140 million to cover the cost of the data breach. The reputation damage was quite unfortunate. They have had a lot of interviews. Their CEOs had to come to TV. Definitely, no one wants to be in her shoes. On top of that, Optus has offered for 1 year subscription to credit monitoring and identifying protection services through Equifax and Protected for the most affected customers. So it was was the PII data breach. So the biggest danger for the customer is the impersonation and the identity theft. Just as an example, a 20-year-old scanned text message to at least 92 Optus customers. He used the data from the breach to demand $2,000. Anyway, he got captured and there's a charge against that guy. But that's the absolute minimum kind of identity theft or misusing the information. So identity theft or the impersonation is the biggest risk right now for these 9.8 million Optus customers. So at the back of that data breach, the class action has been brought against Optus. The Australian Information Commissioner opened an investigation against them. They have received an extra 5.5 million over 2 years for their involvement in response to the Optus data breach. They have also investigated whether Optus took reasonable steps to protect personal information and whether its data collection practices were necessary and aligned to the privacy principles. The other important thing at the back of this cyber attack and the Medibank and a couple of other is the government has fast-tracked the reforming to the Privacy Act. So the amount of penalty in the Privacy Act was not good enough. So the maximum penalty for the serious breaches has gone up to at least 50 million. So the amended include the higher fines and all that sort of things to the Privacy Act, which is a good outcome for Australia. All the enterprises, especially all the enterprises, if your yearly business revenue is more than 3 million per year, you are liable to report all the cybersecurity incidents. So basically, it's a crime if just hiding an incident, especially if your revenue is above $3 million per year, and all the company directors are liable to report the cybersecurity incident and deal with the consequences. And the Privacy Act, the amendment, include higher fines and very serious consequences. So what we always recommend is better to prevent than cure. Better to have the right security controls. In Optus case, they had the misconfigured API, which from technical perspective, they shouldn't have. So that's why we have some technical recommendations for the APIs. If you guys are dealing with APIs, a lot of the developers, a lot of the architects, engineers, they are working with APIs every day. So the technical takeaways from that cyber attack from technical perspective is use API token authentication with refresh and expiry time. API authorization to be enabled for individual endpoints. API keys and secrets should be stored securely. API rate limit and alerting should be configured. API logging should be enabled. Encryption in transit to be used for API endpoints. It's quite important to have encryption in transit for API endpoints. The last but not the least, it's highly recommended when you're using all these API technologies, use security testing. It needs to be done. You need to do SAS testing, which is the static testing. You change it as the security testing for your code. You need to do DAS security testing as a dynamic testing, and you should definitely consider both internal and external penetration testing to identify the vulnerabilities. So from my perspective, they haven't done this proper testing, SAS, DAS, and penetration testing. Otherwise, they could have identified that they have unauthenticated API and they wouldn't be in the situation they are today. So all this security testing and following the best practices can really avoid you guys to be in a situation like where Optus is today. All right, so that was a little bit of update and technical takeaways for Optus. The second one that we did the case study last session, and we're going to do a little recap. The Medibank, for those who missed the last sessions, it was compromised login credentials. So the login credentials got compromised. The criminal hacks and login credentials. The criminals hacked the login credentials, someone with the high-level system access, and sold them to the Russian hackers, which is the Rebel Group, one of Russia's most active ransom gangs. So they could manage to have a ransom in Medibank environment. Unfortunately, the EDR platform could not pick it up. They have had an EDR platform, but apparently as part of one of the interviews, they have announce what kind of products they are using. That's why you never tell people what kind of products and solution you are using. The hackers, they could manage to bypass the product and use the vulnerabilities of the products or the misconfiguration of the products. So the EDR couldn't pick that up. That caused around 9.7 million PII, personal identifier information, and around 160,000 PHI, which is personal health information from Medibank, 300,000 from AH, and 20,000 international customers from medical record perspective, because the 9.7 million is for PII, part of it is PHI, which is personal health information. So that was biggest and worse than Optus. Optus was just only PII, as opposed to Medibank, which is PII for all their customers, and part of their customers is PHI, which is personal health record as well. So hackers claim they stole 200 gigabytes of data. Medibank said, so the ransomware group, they are asking for money. Typical Russian ransomware group, they ask for money. The Chinese usually they're after information. Medibank said they won't pay ransom demand by the rebel group, and they have started just releasing the customer information into dark web, which is quite unfortunate. A law firm filed a class action against Medibank for the data breach, and also the Australian Information Commissioner, they filed the case as well, and the immediate cost between 25 to 35 million as a financial damage for Medibank. So Optus immediate cost was 140 million, a lot of money for just not configuring the APIs in the right way, having an unauthenticated API. They could have run some penetration testing for SaaS testing, dash setting penetration testing for less than $50,000 to avoid that, to save that 140 million. Same as Medibank, they haven't had the right security controls in place. The EDR solution couldn't get the most out of the EDR platforms. Unfortunately, they ended up in this mess, and the immediate financial damage for Medibank is around 25 to 35 million. So both Optus and Medibank caused a lot of financial damage and reputation damage. And there are open class action against both companies. It can come with regulation damage as well. Okay, so the third one, AGL cyber breach. So cause of the attack was stolen credentials. So the malicious actor have used a stolen credential acquired externally to access 6,000 plus customers' account. So basically, they could get the username and password used elsewhere, but their customers. So that's one of the reasons that we always recommend do not use same password across multiple platforms. That's exactly what has happened with AGL. The hackers could manage to get the passwords of more than 6,000 AGL users from dark web. These are mainly the repeated password people use across multiple platforms. And that's how they could manage to get into my account platform for AGL and get access to more than 6,000 customers' accounts. As soon as they have identified the incident, they had to make a lockdown across all customer accounts. So if you are AGL customer, you have experienced that lockdown across your AGL account, which is not a good thing. So if you look at the cybersecurity, all the attacks, they either target your confidentiality, which is an authorized access to the data, or they target your integrity, which is the unauthorized change to your data, or they target your availability, which they don't want whatever the service or platform is to be available, such as the DOS attack and all that sort of things. So ultimately what has happened here, the AGL had to lock down all their customers. So they compromised availability right now by themselves, and they forced each and every customer to reset their password, and they highly recommended all their customers to activate two-factor authentication. So multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication is a must. It's highly recommended to be used across all platforms. So the main takeaways from AGL cyber attack is A, do not share passwords across multiple accounts and platforms. B, enable multi-factor authentication across all your accounts. If it's hard for you guys to use the apps, just use the text messages. And if you are using the app, always set up text messages as the second channel for getting your two-factor authentication, because a lot of the time you just change your smartphone. It's really hard to get an authentication app back on your new smart device. That was the AGL. So TPG, the cause of the data breach is unauthorized access to the corporate emails. So they have had the hosted Microsoft Exchange server, which got compromised. They were not using the cloud platform. So a lot of the times cloud can be more secure than on-premise. So they have had their servers on-premises as opposed to using the cloud version. So ultimately, when you are using the cloud version, you are getting the service from trusted service providers such as Microsoft. They do all the patching behind the scene. They keep the environment safe and secure. But for TPG, the Exchange servers was hosted on-premises. So the email address of up to 15,000 corporate customers got breached. So basically, the primary aim of that hack was to search for customers' cryptocurrency and financial information. If you are in cryptocurrency, you might have noticed a lot of the platforms or a lot of the individuals are getting hacked and compromised. So if you lose your wallet, if you lose your cryptocurrency, it's gone. It's like you lose your money, it's gone. It's not really easy to take it back. So yeah, the impact was compromise of email addresses belonging to 15,000 customers. The share value fall off. So so closing down between 2.8 to 3.7%, which was a big loss for TPG, and also carried out a forensic review and found the unauthorized access to the hosted Microsoft Exchange platform. So yeah, that was another attack that was helping the Australian Privacy Act. So if you look at all these hacks that we went through, just I'll put the brief slide again. So Optus, Medibank, AGL, we definitely have a moment right now with all these PII data breaches. You really need to be careful with your identity. If you look at it, a lot of these things could be avoided by just having the right security controls in place and doing the right security testing. We just finished the 4 Australian cyber attacks and data breaches. So let's move on to the next one, which is the American one, Capital One Bank. So Capital One Bank, that was one of the biggest hacks within American with US history. So basically the cause was unauthorized access. So the attack on their cloud platform between March and July 2019, which compromised personal data. So the employee of Amazon Web Services, AWS, has been sharing information about her activities openly, and also she has been captured as part of this attack. So basically, FBI and Capital One disclosed that the bank has suffered the massive data, personal identifier, and financial data for more than 100 million customers. That was really big. 100 million customers in US and 6 million customers in Canada. So yeah, as I mentioned, the FBI arrested the former Amazon employee in connection with the crime. She accused her position and also breaching 30 other companies by just created a program to scan cloud customers for a specific web application firewall misconfiguration. So again, another misconfiguration. Because at the end of the day, the cloud platforms can be quite safe and secure, but as long as you have the right configuration in place. It's like a house. You get your builder to build the most secure and safest house for you. But end of the day, within your house, you have the doors, you have the windows and everything. So if you leave the door or windows open, it's your fault. So the cloud platform is quite important to understand. It's a shared responsibility. So it's not all about the cloud provider. It's a shared responsibility between the cloud provider and the customer. So there are a lot of security features across cloud platforms such as AWS or Azure or Office 365, Microsoft 365, but you need to enable them. You need to ensure that you have the right configuration across these platforms. And we're going to play an animation which is done by one of our partners, Ninja. So they create an awareness training video based on this attack. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to play this one for you guys, and then we would go through the takeaways.
Capital One Bank recently disclosed a breach of 106 million credit card applications. The hacker stole personal information, including 80,000 bank account numbers, in one of the largest breaches of a major financial institution ever.
I got here as fast as I could. How bad is it?
Bad. Let's get inside.
There appears to be stolen data of yours in someone's GetScrub account.
The email that was routed to our incident response account.
And the FBI's already verified the breach?
Yes, a hacker who goes by the name Nomadic stole personal data from 100 million of our customers.
That number is staggering.
I know. The hacker sent a spear phishing email to Anderson Williams, whom she knew has privileged access to our Nile cloud server, which contains confidential information about every Metropolis One customer.
Why'd the hacker target him?
Because she used to work here and knows his elevated access level. This attack was somewhat novel in that it was disguised as a voicemail message.
I see. Most people know better than to click on any web links included in unverified emails. But not everyone knows that malware can also be embedded in voicemail messages.
Precisely. Once Anderson clicked on it, nothing concerning appeared to happen. But in the background, code was being executed that opened back-end access to the Nile cloud server, and the hacker owned it at that point. Nomadic then started bragging all over the GetScrub website, which is frequented by hackers, that she had access to this data. A mistake that eventually led us to receiving the email tip.
Our phone system does send voicemails through email, so I see how this was a rather novel and sneaky method. But weren't there clues that should have tipped Anderson off?
Yes. For starters, the word voice message was spelled as all one word. Our system would have proper grammar, spelling, and punctuation. Next, the attachment was a .html file. In a legitimate voicemail to email system, the attachment would be a sound file, such as a .wav file or something similar. Also, the domain was obvious that it wasn't from our metropolis1.com domain, but a German domain, as it ended in .de.
It also looks like the voicemail was sent at 12:18 a.m. Chances are someone wouldn't leave a message at that time, and the date and time is completely different than the date and time listed in the details below. I also see the word external in the brackets on the first line of the email, the tag our email system puts on all emails originating from an outside domain. The Metropolis One voicemail system is on our own domain, so the email would not have gotten tagged as external.
Correct. And finally, the from number is missing the last 2 digits. Our voicemail notifications always list the entire phone number it came from.
How bad should we expect the fallout to be from this?
Well, for reference, the Electrofax hack was of similar scope, and it was resolved in court with a $700 million settlement.
700 million. All because someone clicked on a malicious voicemail attachment.
I'm afraid so.
Okay, so getting back to Capital One, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. So teachable takeaways, obviously inspect emails that contain attachment with extra cautious, and just be mindful of anomalies. So in this case, you could see they have misused the whole voicemail situation. And the guy who received that voicemail, he hasn't or she hasn't noticed that it's the HTML file, it's not the typical WAV file. And the email that he could or she could have guessed that something is wrong by just having all those external tags on all that sort of things. So business email compromise is one of the most common, as Georgia mentioned, based on the statistics right at the start of the webinar. So still one of the most common ones. Which comes to the cybersecurity awareness training. As much as you teach your team, yourself, how to be the smartest security control within your organizations, that's what it matters, as opposed to be the weakest link in the chain. We don't want that. Okay, so these are the 5 cybersecurity attacks and data breaches. Based on that, a lot of the times I get that questions, how can we make our environment safe and secure? So obviously cybersecurity uplift, most of the organizations are having a cybersecurity uplift program. I get asked this question, what are the phases? How should we do the cybersecurity uplift? So what we recommend is the first phase of the cybersecurity uplift is the cybersecurity health assessment. You need to do threat assessment, you need to do penetration testing to identify the vulnerabilities and threats. Based on the identified vulnerabilities, it's quite important to do a risk assessment. You need to raise a risk. You need to raise a risk per vulnerability. You need to rate the risk based on the likelihood and consequence. You need to rate them high risks, medium risk, or low risk. So when you have a good understanding of your risk, of your cybersecurity risk and vulnerabilities, then you need to do the solution architecture, come up with a plan how to mitigate the risk. So based on your solution architecture, you can mitigate the risk and mitigate or remediate the risks. And obviously, when you have solution architecture, you need to get involved with the implementation governance. You need to keep your solution architects around to do the implementation governance and oversee the whole process. The last but not the least, in fact, the most important one is the awareness training, to learn from other people's mistakes. That's why we are running these webinars. We are sharing this information with you guys, where you guys get to know what has happened to the other organizations and how we can learn from other people's mistakes. And as I said a few times, cybersecurity consequences can be quite high. It can come with financial damage, reputation damage, or legal damages.